This is Embrace Your Inner Boldness, a podcast about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. I'm Melissa Henning-Frank, coach, guide, and founder of Becoming Bold. I help you strip away the conditioning, reclaim your voice, and rise into the power that's always been yours. Let's get right to it. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Today's conversation is about resilience. Not in a way that makes you feel like you have to overhaul your entire life by tomorrow, but we're really getting practical and honest, and we're talking about resilience in the moments that actually matter. The ones where you still have to lead, you still have to communicate and function, even when life feels heavy behind the scenes. I'm joined by Cynthia Conigliaro from Workwell Webinars, and we're covering real usable ways to build resilience, along with the deeper reality of what it looks like when resilience is the thing that gets you through something really hard. And this is one of those conversations that gives you tools and perspective. So let's get into it. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me. You're the first guest that I have ever had on the Embrace Your Inner Boldness podcast.
Wow, I'm so honored, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So for my listeners, I want to introduce you to Cynthia Conigliaro. She is well known for improving employee health, satisfaction, and productivity one webinar at a time. And from what I know about you, Cynthia, you're an experienced and dedicated health and wellness presenter with a background in both mental health and wellness. And something that I found fun on your LinkedIn profile was that you played guitar in a country band for many years. So that was a fun fact to see about you. So what I would love to do is just turn it over to you to let my listeners know who you are, what you do, and why you're passionate about the topic of resilience.
Sure. Thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Yes.
A little bit about me. So as you mentioned, Melissa, my background is both mental health as well as traditional health and wellness. Master's in social work and psychology. Also have been a health and wellness coach for a little over 20 years. I'm also a corporate wellness presenter. So I do a lot of webinars and in-person presentations, mostly virtual because I'm talking to companies across the country on a whole variety of health and wellness topics that kind of span body, mind, as well as the organization. So the final category would have been topics such as leadership, team building, communication, corporate culture, and all the topics that employees deal with. So yeah, and I also spent about, I guess, a little over 5 years working for a wellness consulting firm called Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems. The acronym we use is OWLS. And in that role, it was fantastic because I was able to really dive into the topic of resilience. We did a resilience coach training for coaches across the globe, actually.
Wow.
We delivered that training quite a few times. As another training that was designed by the owner of the company I worked for, it was called Resilience. It was the Resilience to Thrive Facilitator Training, and that was in partner with the National Wellness Institute. So we've delivered that training countless times, hundreds of times, and that was really, in my opinion, what got me really excited about this topic of resilience because I've been around it for so long. And I apply all the concepts that I've learned to my coaching. I have group coaching I do, as well as well as my workshops and webinars.
That's amazing. And I know when we first started talking, we met, I think, through a networking event, virtual networking event, and then just connected after that. And we definitely share the same passions. And so
Definitely.
when you mentioned resilience, there couldn't be a better match for my audience because everything that we talk about points to being resilient. So I'm just grateful to have you here, especially with your experience and your knowledge on this topic.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes.
You know, I think we heard more about resilience, at least in my opinion, around the pandemic. We kept
That's so
hearing the
true.
term. Do you agree?
Yes.
I just feel like we just started to hear about resilience and it's just a buzzword. And I'm so glad because obviously it's such an important topic. And for me and all that I'm doing with my groups and my one-on-ones, like the topic of resilience. And I'm also a mindset coach. I do a lot of presentations on mindset. I studied under Mike Dooley, so I'm an infinite possibility certified trainer, which I
Wonderful.
love that whole
Yeah.
training. Yeah, that was phenomenal. And just the whole topic of resilience is just really, really important to me on both a personal level and with my work that I do.
Awesome. So, if you could take a moment or two to describe what resilience means to you and how you've experienced it or how you've seen others experience it for my listeners so that they kind of get a picture of what resilience means. Because I think sometimes people
Yeah.
have a different definition of it. So, your definition of it based on your experiences and how you've seen others perform
Yeah.
resilience.
Yeah, definitely. It's so true. There are so many definitions of resilience, and I don't think there's one right definition. But I think I probably would have to describe resilience as the ability to bounce back
Mm.
after adversity. Just that ability to move forward even in times of extreme crises. I've seen so many people that have just demonstrated resilience. And as I mentioned earlier, I coach on this topic, I train others in becoming more resilient. And people will ask me, do you think resilience is something that you're born with?
Mm.
And, my response is always honestly, no. You can become more resilient with time. There are people who I would describe as kind of naturally more resilient. Maybe it's just how they're wired. But I do firmly believe that resilience is something that can be developed. And I mean, I can see it because I can see it in my clients.
Wonderful. And I that takes me to another thing that I noticed in your social media profiles about the topic of neuroplasticity. And
So interesting.
yes,
It
how does
is.
that play into resilience?
Oh, it's a great question. It's so interesting. So, yeah, I could talk about neuroplasticity forever. I just did a presentation last week for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine on mindset shifts and how we can go about making mindset shifts to the positive. So, shifting from negative to positive. And it's just fascinating the fact that we can literally rewire our brain. And this comes out of the field of positive psychology and a really well known researcher who you probably have heard of, Carol Dweck.
Mm-hmm.
She's out of California.
Yes.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she has that fantastic book called Mindset. And it's all about altering the way you basically perceive the world around you, the way you perceive what happens to you in life. Because, I always tell people, let's face it, life is not always going to be a bowl of cherries, right? We have so many ups and downs in this world, and we really need to learn how to function and move forward. And resilience, in my opinion, is one of the best strategies, trying to really try and improve your own personal resilience, which then you can help others with their resilience. And that's why I love my work, because I'm continually helping people to become more resilient. And it's just an amazing experience to see the change
Mm.
that I notice in people as I can observe them showing increased resilience. It's so powerful.
Yes, it could be such a transformation from the mindset shifts that you talk about. So important to being able to have that skill set and the toolkit when hard times do happen because
Exactly.
we're human beings and there are going to be difficult times. So having those
Oh, no
tools is
question.
so needed. So
So
I
needed.
would love to hear
Yeah.
you give an example or just give us information on is there a difference between being resilient and simply tolerating things that they've outgrown? My audience
Yeah.
definitely are in a space where they like when I talk about how your circle and how your orbit supports you or not, and resilience in those situations where maybe their circle or their orbit isn't exactly supporting them. How do they tell, okay, am I being resilient here or am I just tolerating things that I've outgrown?
That's a great question. When I think about tolerating versus resilience, I think they're related, but there's a difference. When I think about tolerating, it's almost a little bit of a stagnant state. It's almost like you're not really quite moving forward in the way you are when you are, in my opinion, exhibiting resilience. Tolerating is kind of the beginning. You can tolerate a situation, but what we hope, as a resilience coach, what we hope is that people will do more than just kind of tolerating a situation. We're hoping they're going to find ways to move forward, and those ways for moving forward are in some situations very complicated.
Yeah.
And they can sometimes involve a lot of different aspects of their life. And it certainly is not the same for each person. So it's very varied, it can be very complicated, very complex, but definitely a different situation to be tolerating versus being resilient.
Yes, I can definitely see the difference there. And I
Mhm.
possibly burnout has a place in this conversation too. It seems to me like everything points to resilience with any kind of hardship that people are going through.
Definitely, no question.
So I know you mentioned earlier that resilience can be learned, and you see this in the transformative experiences with your clients. Can you
Hmm.
help my listeners with maybe some tips and tricks on how they can build that resilience?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, definitely no cookie cutter, no one size fits all. Very variable, depending on even the situation, right? Because I'm dealing with adversities, trauma, stressors, sometimes multiple stressors, sometimes long-term stressors. So the situation really is very variable in terms of how to kind of help my clients become more resilient. But I will say, overall, there are a number of techniques that do, in my opinion, tend to work very well. And everything from community, for instance, it sounds so basic, reaching out to community. But so many times when people are going through a very difficult situation, they often become insular and they don't reach out to their friends and family or their
Mm-hmm.
community. So that's one thing I always recommend, that people do reach out to community. I lead a mindfulness group. I'm trained in MBSR, and I lead a mindfulness group for women who are struggling with infertility and pregnancy loss.
Wow.
And it's amazing for them to have that community,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a group of people they can meet with every month, share their experiences, and they always leave that workshop feeling like just so much brighter, more positive, and just like they have a lot of support around them, which is always so helpful with resilience. I always encourage people to practice self care. A lot of people that I'm talking with, they become very down in the dumps. Maybe they're just not taking care of their body and mind like they used to, or they're not even aware of the importance of self care. So, even little things like, going for a walk in the middle of the day, or I always encourage my clients to do things like try to practice meditation if they can fit it into their day, even just a couple of minutes, just to reset their mind.
Yes.
I'm a huge proponent of body and mind wellness. They're so interrelated. The body affects the mind affects the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm working with people, I always focus on both aspects of wellness and then address which area needs the most support. How is this person sleeping? Sleep to me is like like sleep is so, so important. And I look at what's going on in that aspect of their wellness. Are they sleeping enough? Are they sleeping too much? So just trying to look at everything to make my client excited about the idea of moving forward, which then will make them a more resilient person.
Mm-hmm. So, community and self care.
Community, self care, really trying to practice mind body wellness. And in terms of the mind, I mentioned meditation, but even, practicing positive affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge fan of anything dealing with the positive. You see my office, it's covered with little signs,
Yes.
positive things. And I really do believe that having a positive mindset takes work. I do believe that it's not something that I consider myself to be a pretty positive person. Having said that, I have spent a long time really working on that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do believe that is why I tend to be more positive. And people will ask me when I'm doing my presentations on either stress management, burnout, resilience, mindset shifts, whatever it is, people will say, are you always positive? Are you always happy? And I say, honestly, no. Like, I can't always be happy. Of course, I understand that this life is a complicated one. I've had my share of ups and downs. But the thing about resilience, Melissa, I do really believe this. I really believe that resilience is built from stress and tragedy. I consider myself to be a pretty resilient person, and I truly believe part of the reason why I consider myself to be so resilient is based on pretty horrific situations, unfortunately, I have lived through. So I love sharing. We call it our resilient story, and we all have one. We all have a resilient story. Most of us have many resilient stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I do this in my trainings. I have people share one of their resilient stories. And sometimes people will say, I don't think I have a resilient story. And then after a little bit of reflection and talking, they'll realize, okay, I do have a resilient story. And they'll recognize what we at Owls actually describe as raw coping power.
Ooh.
And that raw coping power is basically our inner resilience that we believe that we are all born with. Isn't that
That
powerful?
really is. Yeah, I got
I
goosebumps.
know.
I got
It's
goosebumps
so
from that one.
powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. So the owner of the company I worked for, Dr. Joel Bennett, wrote a book called Raw Coping Power. And I read that book and I was just so moved by it. It was so powerful.
amazing. What are,
Yeah, and that book is the basis of all our trainings, of all our resilience trainings.
okay. Would you say that the community, the self care, and the mindset are those big topics in that book, or is there anything else from that book that you would think is important to share?
Yeah, the book is super powerful. I mean, there's a whole series of tools. There's 22 tools in the book.
Wow.
And that's something we can provide to people actually in PDF so they can get electronic, or you can buy the book on Amazon as well. And so the book gives a very extensive description of what is resilience, how to achieve it, how to get through stress, adversity, move forward in life. It's super powerful. Yeah,
That's
I could talk about
amazing.
that forever. But
Yes.
yeah, it is
What is the
really
name of that
interesting.
book again?
Raw coping power.
Okay, I will make sure that's also in the show notes because I think that's one that my listeners are going to want to check out for sure.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. Really
Amazing.
is.
So I agree. I think resilience is, it tends to be built out of a need for it, like you mentioned, with experiences that we probably, looking back, are amazed that we made it through. And it,
No question.
what I love about the community of self improvement is there's so many times where there is a direct correlation between what the person's work is and what their passions are and what they went through. But I'd love to just chat briefly about how some people can take their experiences and then shape it into something helpful, like you, like me. And then there's some people who really are devastated by it.
Yeah, yeah.
How can people differently so that they can come out of it on the other side and be that person who can way for the people who are also on a similar path?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're asking basically is how can we make people more resilient? How
Yes.
can, yeah, like we talked about, obviously no one size fits all. You know, there's definitely a lot we can do to help people out to become more resilient. And, you know, one of the first things that we do as resilience coaches is we look to see how is this person coping? Meaning, what is he or she doing to cope? Is this person taking positive or negative coping strategies? So, what I mean by negative is, are they doing things that are not helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, are they drinking too much? Are they eating too much? Are they doing drugs? Are they binge watching? Are they on social media? You know, are they basically practicing unhealthy coping
Mm-hmm.
strategies? And so, you know, what we're doing is we're helping people to realize, you know what, there might be some other ways that you can deal with this very difficult situation or trauma or whatever situation they're dealing with. And sometimes it just helps someone else to look in on the other person and say, maybe you want to do something a little differently. And then we then design our intervention. It could be getting some outside help. It could be maybe this person is religious, encouraging them to, get more involved with their religion, whatever it is. But it can sometimes be very involved and it can sometimes be lengthy. What we find is that people are excited about moving forward. They don't like being in that not so comfortable place of sometimes deep sadness, lots of anxiety, whatever it is that they're dealing with on account of the trauma they just experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what cognitive reconstructing is all about, right? Trying to help other people to look at a situation a little bit differently, trying to reframe how they're interpreting what we describe as a stress, trying to rethink and then move forward in a positive way. It could mean like setting up an action plan. As a coach, we always talk about coaching versus therapy. So coaches are more apt to set up action plans, concrete steps on how this person can move forward, which is one reason why I love coaching. I'm also a social worker, so I love mental health and focusing on, more the psychological and looking at kind of what's going on with my client from a psychological standpoint. So both can be super helpful, coaching with the counseling or some kind of a form of therapy and helping people to move forward to become more resilient.
Yes.
I do work with athletes as well. A lot of high school and college athletes struggle a lot with depression and anxiety. And one of the things that we're working on is helping them to become more resilient. Because the more resilient you can be, the better you're going to perform,
Mm.
both on the athletic field as well as in all aspects of your life. So the field of resilience is just really a booming, booming field right now, which is fantastic. It excites me so much.
Yes, I have definitely seen that too. And there's a big difference in my mind with the generations and how each of them
Yes,
views resilience. What would you
definitely.
say about the different generations and resilience?
That's a great question. I actually am really fascinated by generational differences for some reason. That I don't know why, I just always have been. And you hear about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and people claim that Gen X are really resilient.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know, but that's what they say. I guess I would agree. I have two teenagers. I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they have, I think, a different ideology about resilience. I think I can't quite point it, but I will say I have worked very hard to set a really positive example of resilience to my children. And that is great because they, I feel, have, in a sense, become more resilient on account of the way I've tried to raise them.
Mm-hmm.
And the resilience really is one that people are more apt to watch what you're doing than to listen. So if you want someone to become more resilient, they're more apt to become so if they mirror what you're doing versus what you say. So that's really, I think, an exciting aspect that people have identified about resilience and the importance of really kind of showing people what does resilience look like. And
Mm-hmm.
I think about times in my life when I really made a point to show my children I'm resilient. And that's really exciting because I would call them resilient people.
Yes, that's such a good point, Cynthia. Just the idea of being that example, because I think
So important.
yes,
So important.
sometimes it's resilience isn't something that's easy to talk about all the time, and it can be
No.
hard to describe to someone who's younger and trying to figure out life. But then when they witness somebody and how they're showing up in the face of something adversarial, like you mentioned earlier, when we went through quarantine and COVID, and the
Hmm.
example that people set through that process, I'm sure really affected the children coming out of that,
Oh, no,
how they saw the situation being handled positively, how they saw the situation being handled negatively, and what they will do going forward.
definitely.
Yes. Also, I would love to just take another minute or two and talk about how resilience shows up in the workplace and what leaders can do to model resilience for their employees.
Great question. That's something that we do at Owls as well. Is we have a whole resilient leadership workshop, and it's so important, like we just talked about, right? Modeling resilience for the others. Definitely. I think sometimes leaders forget that they are examples for the
Right.
employees. And right, and so it's just really important to remind them. And we talk a lot about heart-centered leadership, and really being. I'm actually talking about empathy in a couple of weeks, empathy at work. Making sure that leaders have that empathic kind of way of interacting with their employees, and employees interacting with their colleagues in an empathetic way. But to really be able to show resilience, especially in times of difficulty. For instance, I myself have been involved in a couple of large mergers, and that can be a very stressful time for employees as employees are getting laid off and departments are kind of consolidating, and really trying to show resilience in times of difficulty and huge layoffs. A lot of companies, I think, are recognizing that when employees are feeling supported and their stress is, not as high, and burnout is less likely to happen, they're more productive, they're less likely to leave the company, so turnover goes down. So there's so many reasons why we want our employees to be, in a good mindset, and to be resilient, and to be feeling like they're able to control whatever's going on both personally and professionally in their life,
Yes.
which is great. I think a lot more employers are looking at the whole person. Maybe this person's having issues outside of the home. Maybe we want to do more around work-life balance. I think it's really exciting that way. I'm hearing more and more about this.
So, for the listeners who are listening to us and they're like, okay, that sounds great and everything, but tell me exactly what to do. So, do you have two or three things that if you're a leader, let's say in a manufacturing company, and you don't know where to start with helping your employees build their resilience, what are a couple of things that they can tactically do?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to really make sure the leaders are understanding what is going on with their employees. Like I mentioned earlier, some, leaders are busy, right? They just sometimes they don't even know what's going on with their employees because they're just busy. They can't keep up with it. With the owner of a company a week or so ago, and I asked if he'd had any one-on-ones with his employees, and he said, honestly, no, I'm too busy. And I said, it would really be great if you could take the time just to sit down and talk with them and see how they're doing. So I really think that's the first step, is to really try and encourage leaders, managers, whoever it is we're talking about, supervisors, to spend time with their employees, better understanding how is this person doing?
Mm-hmm.
Is he or she getting burned out? Is he or she feeling overwhelmed? Are they feeling that their coworkers maybe aren't communicating well? What is going on? So just really trying to assess what's happening.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's also super important as leaders to make sure that they are practicing positive affirmations with the employees, meaning if an employee just did a great job, making sure that they're getting that recognition, even shooting a quick email out like, thank you so much for all you did on that project. So just making sure you are, making sure that you acknowledge people's wins. Super important. One thing that we did a lot at Owls and still do is we do check-ins at the start of every staff meeting, every weekly staff meeting. So we would say where we're at, a scale of 1 to 10.
I love
And
that.
it was a way to check in. Yeah, it was so great. And it's just a way to check in on your colleagues, what's going on. And there's been situations where sometimes people would say, honestly, I'm a 1. And they didn't have to share what it is. But if they want to, they knew that the team was there to listen. So I think just showing that kind of support can really be helpful as a leader and can build resilience.
That's amazing. And I think the leaders that embody that and really embrace that kind of thing in the workplace, in the long run, that is going to serve them so much better as their team grows and develops, and as people start feeling much more safe, seen, and supported. It's
Definitely.
required in the workplace now. It's earlier when we were talking about the generations. I think you might look back at Gen X and before and say they didn't need all of that and it was considered hand holding. I would disagree with that. I think we did need that, but we didn't know how much we needed it.
Yes, I agree. It's so true.
Yes.
Yeah, we have evolved a lot. I
Hmm.
do agree with that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of this wonderful information you have shared with my listeners. I think it's been a great time talking to you and learning about
Melissa.
resilience and the different ways that we can show resilience and the different ways we can model resilience and how we can lead with resilience. I would love to put in the show notes information about how people can find you. So do you have like just different social media handles that you can tell people about? And then I'll
Sure.
also put it in the show notes.
Okay, yeah. So thank you again for having me today, Melissa. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So that's where my professional social media is. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My website is workwellwebinars.com. And that's really the best way to reach me. It's just Cynthia at workwellwebinars.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great, Melissa. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
That's it for today's episode of Embrace Your Inner Boldness. If this stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Screenshot this episode, tag me at Becoming Bold LLC, and share it with someone else who's ready to rise. And hey, if you haven't already, take a second to subscribe, rate, and review the show. That's how we spread the boldness and keep this movement growing. Whatever came up for you today, feel the fear and do it anyway. You don't need to wait for perfect timing or permission. You are powerful. You are ready. And remember, the only limit to your boldness is the one you set for yourself. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep becoming you.